Hello, everyone. So, good afternoon in Brazil and good evening in Ireland. I'm very happy to attend and present this event today, and I would love to welcome everyone here. So, I hope you all enjoy it. My name is Rubia Goulart, and I'm the current Vice President of Irish Business Network Brazil. Uh, IBN is an independent business network of well-connected and experienced Irish and Brazilian professionals that organize events on regular basis on various and relevant topics in Brazil to help forge strong commercial ties between the two countries. So we seek partners in Brazil and in Ireland who want to benefit from our influence and expertise in different sectors of both economies. Tonight, we will have Liam Lawlor, and which is an IBN member, discussing the macroeconomics factors associated with Brazil and is speaking from personal experiences regarding to pitfalls of investments. And also, we will have Amit Ramnami, an experienced financier that will discuss more specific financial elements related to real and banking in Brazil. The end of the section, we will be open for questions. So don't be shy and ask anything on the chat during the event, and we'll be posting the questions at the end. Our first speaker is Liam, an Irish tech entrepreneur with an MBA from Monash University in Australia, where he excelled in international business and technology. He is the International Trade and Technology Officer for the IBNB, Irish Business Network Brazil, and we'll be going over the general macroeconomics factors affecting Brazil, in addition to some additional topics affecting SMEs in Brazil. I'm now welcome Liam to our event. Thank you.
Hello, thank you, Rubia. One second. Hello, all. My name is Liam, and I'm the International Trade and Technology Officer here at the Irish Business Network Brazil. Um, I'll be going over foreign direct investment, the macroeconomic factors, what it means to invest in Brazil. So, what is foreign direct investment? Well, it's essentially an ownership stake in a foreign company or project made by an investor, company, or government from another country. The term is often used to describe a business decision to acquire a substantial stake or even a greenfield operation in a foreign business or country. There are both macro and microeconomic factors to be examined here. So, first of all, what is the macroeconomic factors to be examined? Well, essentially, this involves what's called a pestle analysis, and that involves the political, economic, social, technological, legal, and environmental factors associated in a country. What are the political factors? Well, essentially, stability of government, potential changes to the legislation under that government, and the global influence the country has. What are the economic factors? Well, these can be such as factors such as economic growth, employment rates, monetary policy, and consumer confidence. Social factors, these are particularly important as in a country like Brazil, and I'll go in to detail about all of these. But income distribution, demographic influence, and lifestyle factors are some of the social factors. What are the technological factors? Well, these can be international influences, the changes in information technology in that country, and the take up rates of new technologies. What are the legal factors? Again, an important factor to be taken into consideration here in Brazil. Taxation policies, employment laws, industry regulations, and health and safety rules. And perhaps nowhere in the world does the environment come into play more so than in Brazil with the Amazon, and we're going into that as well. What are the environmental factors, regulations, and restrictions, and the attitudes of consumers? So, first of all, what are the political factors in Brazil? Well, Brazil is a federation composed of three branches: the executive branch, which is the presidency, the Senate, the lower house, of Congress, and it's essentially based on the U.S. style political system. But the big difference here is Brazil's Congress comprises some 23 parties, 13 of which are major. It's here where laws are proposed and generally live or die. This makes Brazil a bit of a political basket case, to be quite frank. 13 parties instead of just two or three, which is more commonplace in the world. Brazil is the fourth largest democracy in the world, and Brazil's Lula has just been elected president and will so oversee a left-leaning coalition, which is being decided as we speak. What are the economic factors? Well, Brazil is the 10th largest economy in the world and is by some margin the largest economy in Latin America. It's a developing economy which was hit hard by a depression in the beginning of 2014, then a series of economic blunders under the Rousseff government, which culminated in the COVID pandemic disaster under the Bolsonaro government. Brazil has a labour force of approximately 100 million people and an unemployment rate of around 14 or 15%. It has a very diverse economy, and it's not all agriculture. Industry is actually the largest service sector, accounting for 72.7% of the total GDP. So the service sector is the largest, accounting for 72.7% of total GDP, followed by the industrial sector. And the agriculture sector, which is actually the smallest, makes up around 6.6% of the total GDP. Brazil has a newly independent central bank, which I'll be going into in detail in a little while, and it appears to have very sound fiscal management policies, but it is only around 2 years old. Unfortunately, global consumer confidence in Brazil is actually quite low. Now, the social factors come into play in a big way in Brazil. Brazil is a country that suffers from endemic corruption, and it doesn't have a good reputation in the world because of this. It also suffers from incredible income disparity. It sits high in the global hunger index while having decent purchasing power parity. This means that a lot of Brazilians have actual purchasing power parity. They can buy things in the marketplace, but then at the same time, a lot of people are going hungry. So 2% of Brazilians live on just $2 a day, while some 20% live on just $7 a day. And when you put that in comparison with the ninth in the world for having purchasing power parity, it just goes to show the income disparity. And that's even further accentuated by this statistic here. The top 1% of Brazilians control around 45% of the wealth, whilst the top 10% control about 53% of the wealth. The poorest 50% of Brazilians control just 1% of the country's wealth. Rich Brazilians enjoy a very good lifestyle, albeit with some security issues, while the poorest Brazilians survive on little more than ultra-processed food and have little access to basic education or healthcare. This can actually affect another country's willingness to do business with Brazil. Now, technology is an area where Brazil is starting to excel. Surprisingly, it's technologically advanced for a developing nation. It has a recently developed and thriving IT services industry fueled by low labor costs and English proficiency amongst developers. And a recent central bank initiative, the world-beating PIX instant payment system, is now used by over 60% of the population. It's an instant payment system that literally is as quick as taking cash out of your wallet. Brazil plans to launch a digital real. I'll go into more detail about this in a little while, but a digital real is essentially a central bank issued Bitcoin. And Rio de Janeiro as a state will start accepting Bitcoin for property tax payments in 2023. So on the technology front, signs are exceptionally encouraging for Brazil moving forward. Now here's where it gets a bit complicated doing business in Brazil. By the nature of its federal status, Brazil has a complex legal framework involving federal, state, and even municipal laws. It also has a very complex taxation structure involving various federal and state taxation frameworks. So you're doing business at federal and state level, and there's various laws affecting how you do business in that respect. Industry, depending on scale, is governed by either federal government or local municipalities, which can lead to a lot of confusion for small to medium enterprise business owners, which is our focus here at the Irish Business Network Brazil. Employment law in Brazil is governed under the federal constitution under a set of laws known as the Labour Code. Brazil has an exceptionally strong union presence and many collective bargaining arrangements, which may not affect a small to medium business enterprise, but they sure do affect large enterprise. So this is also true. Depending on the industry, health and safety regulations rather strictly enforced or completely non-existent. Now, nowhere in the world does the environment come into play quite like in Brazil. Brazil is home, of course, to the Amazon, the world's largest rainforest, and trade deals on a macro scale are either made or completely non-existent depending on deforestation policies. Many countries in the EU, for example, boycott Brazilian beef and boycott Brazil as a whole as a result of Amazon deforestation. At present, the Amazon is subject to widespread deforestation as a result of the abolition of protection areas by the Bolsonaro government. This should actually change in the near future, as one of the tenets of Lula's election campaign was to start reinforcing the protection areas and to stop deforestation of the Amazon. Consumer adoption of recycling practices is low compared to developed nations, and pollution is rife in populated areas in Brazil. So now I'll go into a few basics, just a few tidbits as an aside to the pestle analysis. Brazil, this is where it gets complex for Irish investors and for Irish companies wanting to do business in Brazil. What's the reciprocal tax arrangement? It's an arrangement where in a country, one country you pay tax and you don't pay tax in another, essentially. Brazil has reciprocal tax arrangements, or arrangements which avoid double taxation and simplified tax agreements with 37 countries. There's a good few EU countries on the list, including France, Germany, and Italy, but Ireland, which I'm not sure why is perhaps viewed in error as a small tax haven, it's a corporate tax haven, does not have a reciprocal tax arrangement. And conversely, Switzerland, an actual small tax haven, does have a reciprocal tax arrangement. So that's one of the things that makes business very hard, and why there's quite a little business goes on between Ireland and Brazil at the moment, is the lack of a reciprocal tax arrangement. So here I'll talk about some of the challenges to opening a small or medium scale business in Brazil, and I have personal experience for that. So if you want to contact me and my email, which we'll put up later, opening a small to medium enterprise in Brazil is actually not a challenge in and of itself. If you get good legal and accounting advice, you can open a new business in about 10 days or 2 or 3 weeks. Labor laws, taxation issues, and other factors can all be challenging. And English is not widely spoken. So if you want to open a business in Brazil, you pretty much have to speak Portuguese or get solid advice from someone who's perfectly bilingual. However, this is where I've had some serious difficulties myself. Opening a small to medium enterprise in Brazil with foreign direct investment does present challenges. There's a lack of familiarity amongst accountants and local city or state-based agencies and providers with Brazilian central bank laws. And there's an incredibly bureaucratic central bank registration process for FDI. It took me a month to do a transaction that would take a couple of days, and between more streamlined countries. So if you watch this space, however, the Brazilian Central Bank has promised to streamline processes, and there's an innovative tech sector that are starting to provide solutions to the bureaucratic process. For instance, if you can transfer in Bitcoin in a matter of days, but if you want to transfer in fiat currencies, it can take anything from 2 to 3 weeks, as I said. The Brazilian central bank is one of the shining lights, and it's the biggest nightmare at the same time. This is where the future and the past are starting to collide. As I said, it took a month to get a transfer in that should have taken a matter of days, but they're incredibly forward thinking. They've been fully independent for just 2 years, despite being in existence for around 30. They recently launched PIX, which is an innovative world-class instant payment processing system in 2020. PIX is now used by over 60% of Brazilians. And it's essentially, like I said, just like taking cash out of your wallet. You plug in a detail, and it's an instant payment processing system that they don't even have in the States or in Ireland. Brazil plans to launch a central bank digital currency. Here it's way ahead of the Fed and the Eurozone. This is planned for 2023. And what a central bank digital currency is, it's just a digital version of a paper note. So it's a Bitcoin for central banks, essentially. And that should be launched next year in Brazil. This will actually come into play as soon as BRICS get together again. Once the Russian-Ukraine conflict is over, Brazil will most likely follow the lead of the ASEAN group, which recently, the ASEAN group's an Asian sort of trade group, and they recently stopped using US dollar as a vehicle currency. So they're starting to trade, say, between rubles and yuan and reals and yuan. So there's no longer need to go to the US dollar, and the launch of a digital real will likely facilitate this. So Brazil's central bank, for all its incumbent bureaucracy, is potentially a shining beacon of light for the country if it can streamline its bureaucratic processes with its forward-thinking digital practices. So if it takes itself out of the past and launches itself into its promising future, this is where Brazil can really shine. So what are the takeaways from this? Oh, sorry, the election results. Well, we've just had an election here in Brazil, and Lula is still busy basically assembling his cabinet and organizing the transition to power. Lula is widely supported by the left, centre-left, and even centre-right parties, and he will, as mentioned in the political part of the pestle analysis, bring a more stable government and a modicum of respect in the international community that was somewhat lost under the Bolsonaro government. Lula opposes deforestation. This is key to what might amount to trade embargoes on Brazilian exports such as beef and key markets such as the EU. And importantly here, Lula was widely backed by the creators of Plano Real, the introduction of the real after the military dictatorship, the cessation of Cruzeiro and the hyperinflation and all the economic instability that was associated with that. Ever since Plano Real, Brazil's had a relatively stable enough currency compared to other Latin American currencies. His election will at least not see efforts to destabilize the work of the Brazilian Central Bank. And the Lula result may well bode well for Brazil's entry into the Organization of Economically Developed Countries. So, what are the takeaways from this? So, just to wrap it up now, so Amit can come on. The takeaways from this: any small to medium business enterprise we can assist you at the Irish Business Network Brazil, but it's very important you seek out solid legal and accounting advice to deal with the complex legalities at federal and state levels. You have to embrace Brazil's technically sound technology base and its forward-thinking central bank policies. And on a macroeconomic level, be aware that factors like corruption, income disparity, and Amazon deforestation in the name of agriculture affect willingness to do business in Brazil and global confidence. So with that, I'll pass you over to Amit and happily take any questions.
Thank you, Liam. Thank you for your inputs. So questions will be posted at the end for both of our speakers. And now I'm happy to welcome Amit Ramnami, international financial advisor based in Rio de Janeiro. Amit set up the consultant firm Ipanema Wealth to provide independent financial planning for expatriates and foreign residents in Brazil and the rest of Latin America as well. Amit and his colleague mainly advise their clients on long-term investments, FX, tax planning, and cash flow forecasting. Amit worked as an advisor firm for Fairhill, France and Brazil, which looked after European and Latin America expatriates prior to that. So he worked in a prestige funds as an alternative investment manager, and he's graduated from Bristol University in 1999 with an economics degree, and he started his career in a corporate banking in London before moving into the world of financial advice. So now I would love to welcome Amit.
Hi, everybody. How are you doing? Thank you, Rubia, for that wonderful introduction. Thank you very much. Yeah, my name is Amit Ramnami, and my firm is called Ipanema Wealth, based in Rio, and we advise expatriates and long-term residents all over, well, mainly Brazil, but our reach extends to other countries in Latin America. And thank you very much to IBN for inviting me to present on a subject which I think is very interesting at the moment, given the volatility. Markets are always volatile, but since 2020, FX, the stock market, the bond market, everything's been pretty much on steroids. So thank you for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to share my views with your community. And I've been to several IBN events in Rio, and I really like the way you have momentum and the way you organize in-person events and virtual events. There's a lot of continuity, and I really appreciate that. I've had a lot of good feedback. So yeah, the apologies for the PowerPoint. It looks a little bit different when it's using this presentation framework, but I'll make sure it's all clear as I go through the presentation, which is called Financial Decisions in Times of Volatility. I'll just click on to the next slide. My background, yeah, it's helping expatriates and long-term foreign residents and inward investors with making informed financial decisions. Expatriates, when I use that word, I mean people who are working on contracts with multinationals, typically 2, 3, or 4 year contracts long-term foreign residents, people like myself. I've been here for 12 years. I'm not quite a veteran yet, but I guess I will be. Maybe another 10 years, I'll get veteran status here. So yeah, people who are living here, not necessarily affiliated to a multinational on a special contract. And inward investors, people who are thinking of investing into Brazil, whether they have Brazilian experience or not. But it's really people who are not actually living here, but looking for a specific investment. So we help our clients with investment strategies and with tax planning, making sure that they're compliant when they're doing business in Brazil. Sometimes we bring in accountants and specialists from other countries, but our own in-house structure is really looking at giving people a platform to make an informed financial decision here. Something which may resonate with some of the veterans and the long-term residents here. I'll give you a little overview of my time, my connection with Brazil. In 2004, I came here on a gap year. On my LinkedIn profile, I call it a sabbatical, but it was a gap year. I was, hiking, partying, going up the coast, and I could see the potential in this country. I thought it was a little secret in a way. I thought, why are people not talking about Brazil in the same way as they were talking about, China, India, other areas of the world? Brazil's got a lot of potential. That's what I was thinking back in 2004 at the early stages of the boom. And then when I went back to the UK, I spent some time in the UK after that, and I followed Brazil from afar. And I thought, wow, things are really taking off. Its stock market performance, the real strengthening, as we'll see on other slides after this. And I became a resident of Brazil in 2011. So I started coming here 2009, 10. The boom was very much in full swing, and I could see that in Rio with the oil shows and the other kind of mining shows. They're full of expats, and you could see that in Zona Sul, that you'd be hearing all sorts of European languages, and there were loads. I remember a big Scandinavian community. It was even bigger back in the day, over a decade ago. But after, I guess, around the time of the World Cup in 2014, it started to flatline and go down, and we were in a fully fledged recession in 2016. So that final line on this slide, 2015 to 2019, that was a very heavy recession. And since I work with a lot of accountants, a lot of them were telling me that businesses, small and medium businesses, were scaling down and letting some employees go. And this was a continuous, prolonged recession. And I guess the next phase would be the pandemic. In 2020, just when things, you could see some green shoots appearing, everything just tanked again with the pandemic, which had a very asymmetric effect on developing economies, on emerging markets. And you could see that in Asia, you could see that in Brazil and all over Latin America. Whenever there's a global recession, emerging markets are much more sensitive, emerging markets and developing countries. Reasons to bring money into Brazil. I'm not going to comment on every single one. The slides are here. This presentation will be saved for viewing at a later date. But, people who are here on a short-term basis, digital nomads, people who've come here to spend a few months, they're drawing money from the ATM. And obviously that's become favorable for anyone drawing money in euros, dollars, and sterling, especially since the pandemic. I mean, the real really fell off a cliff there. Some people are real digital nomads, and they're just bringing in what they need to spend on their rent and their expenses. They're leaving most of their salary overseas from an overseas employer. And then there are many cases of people who are receiving inheritances, wanting to bring in that money into Brazil, pensioners drawing from their state pension or whatever private pension, and obviously property and business investment. Whether it's linked to a visa or not, those are reasons for bigger transfers. And then obviously we saw this with the exodus following during the recession, which mainly kind of accelerated after 2016. People leaving Brazil, people saying, well, the real's weakened. Should we really be sending money back to Europe, back to the US, or wherever they were going to? Well, it weakened even more over that period, and it's much weaker now than it was back in 2016. So yeah, timing the market's a dangerous game. but people were moving their FGTS proceeds out. A lot of Brazilians themselves want to diversify. They don't want to have all of their assets in reals because they've lived through volatile cycles, especially those who've lived through the 80s here. And I hear this all of the time about the 80s with hyperinflation and the uncertainty, which was much more extreme than what we've faced over the last 2 years. So yeah, those are the most common reasons. I know this, I should be talking mainly about euros, given it's for the IBN, but this will kind of, since I'm a Brit, I'm just going to talk quickly about the relationship with sterling. So in 2004, this is pretty small text, but I guess you can enlarge it. 2004, when I came here as a backpacker, it was great. It was like 5 to 1, 5.5 to 1. I was getting a lot for my £1 here. I could really enjoy myself and travel a lot in Brazil. And then over the next few years, the real strengthened against the pound and every other currency. And I remember going to the cash point. I was getting 2.5. And everything was much more expensive in Brazil. So what am I getting here? This is painful because I was drawing from my savings before I started developing business in Brazil. And then obviously the real weakened, strengthened again, and then weakened here, and we're in a pandemic phase here, and it went to nearly 8 reals to £1 for a while. So that gives you an idea of currency volatility. This is a euro real 1 month, and this is now out of date. As I was discussing with Liam and with Rubia earlier today, I thought, hey, I've got to redo my presentation. That's how fast things are moving in the global economy. And the real went to 5.4 last week against the euro. Then it went to just below 5. It was around 4.98. And today it's 5.48. Just think of that in terms of percentage swings. They're wild swings in very short periods, right? That's over the last month. Over the last year, I think 5.48 or whatever it is today, I think that's pretty good. If anyone's bringing money over from Ireland or wherever else in Europe, that's a pretty good rate compared to 3 or 4 years ago. But people have got hooked into this mentality like, hey, it was 6.4, 6.5 last year. Well, it shows how expectations change, right? And then if we look at it since around 2004, we can see that it followed a similar path to the sterling max graph that I showed about 2 or 3 slides ago, where the real strengthened against the euro and other hard currencies and weakened. And around 2015-16, strengthened again. And then obviously with the pandemic, it made hard currencies strengthened against the real and a lot of other Latin American currencies. So if I'd like a little bit of interaction here. Let's go with the question: where do you think the real will be by the 31st of January, the end of January? So 2.5 months away. So 1 month into the new government. Just fire your predictions in. Where do you think it's going to be? Is it going to be weaker or stronger? So let's just go for the question by the end of January. Then I'll ask everyone for their opinion by year end next year. So let's stick with end of Jan for now. I'll wait for those to come in. So I'm seeing here 5.5 to the dollar. What would it be to the euro? So yeah, predictions for the end of January. So the real will strengthen. It's interesting. I like talking to people about this. I get a few messages. There's a friend of mine who's watching it. 5. So you're thinking the real will strengthen slightly. Interesting. Yeah, I know. Some people are thinking, well, I don't want to make a prediction of how much. It's a dangerous game. And as a financial advisor, a lot of people, 4.5 to 5.5. Interesting. As a financial advisor, a lot of people, I'm more of a medium long term. kind of guy. But there are a lot of people who ask me what the real or the dollar, what's going to happen next month. I'm really happy to share my opinion, but given that my business is wealth creation, capital protection, depending on the client's profile, I don't let people hold me against where I think the S&P will be, or the FTSE, or the euro. I don't like people to hold me to it. But the fact is, I'm seeing different opinions here, and they're all coming up on the YouTube chat. Some people have said 4.5 to 5.5, so kind of range bound. 5.5, 4.7 to 5.3, maybe a tighter range. I've heard 6 from some people. I've heard even higher. Let's go to the end of the year. So what kind of rates? What are your guesses for the end of next year? A whole year of the Lula government. Some people are saying it'll be, some friends of mine have said it'll be around 4 reals for the euro. Some people believe it'll be even stronger, like 3. I think that's quite extreme. Or if we get a pandemic-like scenario, if we get more geopolitical uncertainty, it could go to 6.5. It could go back to where it was about a year ago. Yeah, a comment here. There are too many factors, and I'm going to come on to that shortly. So I'm going to move on to the next slide. I'm aware of time, and there's quite a lot to cover, and there's Q&A as well. So yeah, good. A wide range of predictions. So institutional forecasts. These are the people who get paid loads to make forecasts. And while I liaise with these guys on a regular basis, they're qualified, they're good, I like their reasoning, and it's what I do for a living. I like talking to these people at BTG, XP Investments, JP Morgan. They're qualified, they're analytical, but the range of predictions would be similar to some of the comments I've received here, and the range is even wider. It's typically between 4.2, 6.5 against the euro, and we talk about the relationship with different currencies, but the range of forecasts is quite wide. They're all well-paid analysts, but most of them are going to be wrong. Most of them are going to be wrong, and they're still going to get their bonus. I think I'm in the wrong job. I should be working with one of those investment banks. But all of these experts have their reasoning, but most of them are going to be wrong. And it's just like analysts at HM Treasury in the UK. I look at their forecasts, what actually happens. Most of the time they're wrong. So I'm more interested in the reasoning, and how to advise clients based on their own circumstances. Because if you ask me to make predictions, chances are mine will be wrong as well. So Brazil is regarded as a country of the future. We would expect the real to strengthen in the long term. Theoretically, we would expect it to strengthen as it develops and becomes more industrialized. Theory and practice are different things. So I've just mentioned that, a wide range of expert projections and analysis. Follow the reasoning rather than just assuming they have the authority to hold that opinion and hold you to that, and base your expectations on what they have said. If they said it's going to be 5.5, you don't have to follow that and make that the basis of your decision making. Avoid timing the market. One thing which I find frustrating, and financial education, I think it needs to be taught more in the education system, but it does frustrate me when certain clients say, for example, in June, one of my clients was saying, we'll make a decision about money transferring after the election. So what's that? June, July, August, September, October, end of October, given that it went to 2 rounds. That client would wait for 5 months before making a decision. 5 months. The money was sitting in cash in a current account in Brazil during a high inflation period. You've got to avoid waiting for something to happen, because that mentality would also say, let's wait and see what happens in Russia and Ukraine, which hopefully will subside and end. But what if it's a prolonged war? You're going to be waiting for that, then you've got geopolitical tensions between China and Taiwan. Who knows where that's going to go? That's going to affect the real and all currency pairings. What about the midterms? There's always something. Whether you're looking forward, if you look back historically, there's always something which is going to happen. Whether it's a black swan which you're not expecting, or whether it's a specific event. And also avoid looking at the graph. So the graph, the chart of the euro and real, where it was 6.5, right, then going down to 5 and back up to 5.48 today. Just because it was 6.5 doesn't mean it's going to go back there. It might do, it might go to 7, but the same thing as when you're looking at a share price. Just because it was high doesn't mean it's going back there. Follow the reasoning rather than a historic chart. Something I want to say at a very sensitive time, it's good if you're politically agnostic, right? So you may prefer one candidate or another candidate, whether it's Brazil or the United States or wherever. You may prefer Brexit or Remain. Make decisions again based on what is good for you. Yeah, have your political opinion, but there are people I spoke to saying that, oh, so and so is going to win, the real is going to get stronger. Let's wait for that to happen. And they weren't thinking about the probabilities. They were thinking about what they wanted to happen. So it was a decision based on hope. And it went people's way. It didn't go people's way. So I'd avoid linking your own beliefs, your own personal beliefs to your own financial planning. If you think the real could weaken, the real could strengthen, you're going to buy a house here or you're going to send money out, you might want to spread that over the cycle. So you might want to bring some euros in today. If you're buying in March, right? Bring some in today, bring 20% in, regardless of the exchange rate on the 10th of December. Do the same thing on the 10th of January. So you're buying over the cycle because you really don't know what's going to happen. And I don't, neither does the top paid analyst at the top Wall Street firm, okay? It's the reasoning you've got to follow. So let's look at domestic factors. The Brazilian election and transition of power. So if it goes smoothly, that's going to be less reason for volatility of the real. If there are any kind of hiccups along the way, there was news over the last week that the result may be challenged. Those would count as hiccups, regardless of whether the market prefers one candidate or another. Markets prefer certainty. So a transition of power would reduce the potential volatility of the real. Economic growth and inflation are always positive in terms of strengthening a currency. A big one is the interest rate, the taxa Selic, which is 13.75, and it was less than 3% about a year and a bit ago, but they had to increase rates to control inflation. So my view, it may not be right, but I think there's little room for maneuver for it to go to 14.5, because it would have very serious economic effects here. It would hurt the stock market, it would hurt investment, it would hurt personal borrowing. So there's limited room for maneuver now. So I think what's likely to happen is it could plateau, it could go up a little bit, and then it'd have to be a moderate QE, quantitative easing cycle. So a big reason is the interest rate relationships between different countries. So if there's more tightening overseas, the real could actually get weaker. Public debt. The best example I can give is what happened in the UK in September, where there was a mini budget, which was actually a shocking, massive budget in reality, where taxes were reduced and the market thought, okay, we're going to, public debt is going to increase, and that's why the pound fell against all currencies. The pound dollar went to 1.1 or even below that. And that's an example. The more indebted a country is, the weaker it's perceived to be. And you're looking at a weaker currency generally, in theory. There are some exceptions to that rule. Reforms. I'm really, from the bottom of my heart, I hope Brazil undergoes deep structural reform. We need tax reform here. We need a deeper administrative reform, which is the tax reform is looking at things like dividend taxation, changing the progressive table, the tabela progresiva. The administrative reform is reducing the burden of the state, making it slightly leaner, which again goes back to my point about public debt, making the state a little bit lighter. And any policies to incentivize foreign investment. I've been saying these three things since I became a resident here in 2011, and I hope something meaningful happens over this next government. I really do. International factors. An escalation in the Russia-Ukraine war. What will that tend to do? It'll tend to create a risk-off environment. The same with the next point, the China-Taiwan. Again, let's fingers crossed. But if that escalates, if that turns into something serious, it'll result to a risk-off. People will start selling shares. They'll become very conservative, very, very concerned, and money will go into euros and dollars, into sterling, into hard currencies, away from risk assets. What tends to happen when there's geopolitical conflict, regardless of the state of the economy of the UK, Eurozone, US, the currencies of those countries tend to appreciate because more people are buying safer assets. Going back to my previous point, a lot of the real's future depends on global interest rates, right? If they keep hiking rates, the Fed keeps hiking rates, the European Central Bank and Bank of England increase rates, it's going to make those assets, it's going to make the returns for safe assets more attractive, and those will tend to strengthen against emerging market currencies. The US midterms, that could have a moderate effect on Brazil. If there's stability in the US dollar becomes more attractive for all investors globally. And the bottom 2 points, oil price, OPEC, commodity prices, the more demand we have, driven by Asia in particular, China in particular. If commodity is doing well, that tends to benefit the Brazilian economy and the real. I know there's some questions. I'll get onto some of that at the end. Transfer methods, ATM withdrawals. A lot of people, they use that as their only way of drawing money. It is becoming a little bit more difficult to use cash. There are fewer places which accept cash. It's hard to get change. You know, you hand over a note. Sometimes you hand over a note of 20 reals for something which is 8 reals, and they look at you. The cashier says, "No tem algo menor? Haven't you got something smaller?" And no one's got any change. But ATM withdrawals also charge you a very big spread. So I remember the pound was six reals to 1 pound. I got 5.4 at the cash machine. So that's a huge spread. So it's all right now and again, but I wouldn't use that as your primary method over time for, taking out bigger amounts. Money changes, you're not going to get a great rate. If you're walking around Copacabana, those money changes are just for tourists. I wouldn't use that as a long-term method. Bank to bank. Now, banks, this applies to both points. Bank to bank for individuals and corporates, pessoas físicas and pessoas jurídicas. Banks have a captive audience. A big part of that captive audience, they don't tend to question it. They just say, okay, they don't want to look outside the banking framework to achieve a more competitive rate. They just say, okay, especially for smaller and intermediate amounts, they'll do it, and the bank makes so much money on FX. I remember I started my career in banking, and the kind of mantra there was, if your clients are doing a lot of FX work, it's better. You're going to have a more profitable client relationship because it's a captive audience. And in Brazil, you have an oligopoly. You've got 5 main banks and a lot of very, very smaller ones, some digital ones. But the 5 main banks are making a lot of money on FX. Western Union, I don't know much about it. I've never dealt with money transfers in that way, but all I know is the charges are very high. The charges and the spreads are very high. It's not competitive. It's still a major remittance method used around the world. The next two, I'm a fan of. For smaller amounts, these, I don't want to name particular companies. I have named Western Union, right? But I don't want to start naming companies. But online money transfer platforms, there are many. Some are more popular than others in Brazil. I guess it depends on which country you're in. But there are these fintech platforms which are very quick and user-friendly. When you get to a certain amount, it becomes a little bit difficult. You've got compliance loopholes. You've got to provide documentation. It becomes less user-friendly. For larger amounts, I would go with an international money transfer specialist who asks for more documentation up front, but it's easier, especially when you're doing delicate transactions like buying a house, moving money to buy a golden visa, or bringing money to Brazil to buy, to arrange an investor visa. You're buying a company or setting up your own company. So there are several methods. Guidance, as I mentioned in the earlier slide, beware of ATM spreads. It shouldn't be your de facto go-to method. Just now and again is fine. Something which happens a lot, and you need to be aware of it. Sometimes your bank manager may pressure you to say, I'm not joking here, this has happened in Brazil. A lot of friends and clients have told me, and it's happened to me as well. Bank managers have said, if you buy this product, we'll give you a favorable rate. If you buy this insurance product, if you invest X amount with us in our funds, we're going to give you a favorable rate. The two have nothing to do with each other, but that's the way they kind of try and sell their over-the-counter products to encourage their clients to do money transfers at favorable rates. I don't like that. I would say you should be looking outside the banking system to do FX. Note the annual limits. Some of these banks have annual limits, and then they ask for extra compliance paperwork as per some of the digital FX companies. As I said, some providers are more suitable for smaller amounts. Larger amounts are better served by a specialist money transfer agency where you can do transactions between the euro and real. You can keep that account open, and then if you have a contract, let's say in Singapore or the US, you can still use that account for other currency pairings. Compliance. I took that photo actually in Baja, that Alto Risco flag. So compliance and KYC, which is know your customer. IRPF is the tax return, it's the Imposto de Renda de Pessoa Física, and the tax return and asset declaration. When you're doing larger amounts, the larger money transfer experts, there's specialists who deal with larger amounts. They'll be asking you for your tax return, and within the tax return, they'll want to see your asset declaration, which you don't have to do in the UK. They're more interested in your income and your self-assessment. But here, you file your income, so all sources of income from Brazil and around the world, but you also list your assets within Brazil and overseas. So on my tax return, I put my UK bank account. You've got to put your UK property, your trading account. If you have one overseas, you've got to put that there as well. So everything's got to be listed, and they need to see that because they want to say you've declared your source of wealth and you've declared your destination account. So they're following compliance, partly driven by the Brazilian central bank. And if you've got over $1 million worth of assets overseas, you've got to do a separate declaration called the Declaração de Capitais Brasileiros no Exterior. So if you've got 900,000 equivalent dollars, you don't have to fill that in. But if you've got over $1 million, you've got to do that in addition to the asset declaration within your tax return. All right. So if you've got, I want to clarify this because so many people forget about this. They make this mistake. If you've got $100,000 outside, that's got to be in the asset statement of your tax return, and you don't have to do the central bank declaration. If you've got $1 million overseas, that's got to be in your asset return, in your tax return, and the central bank declaration. All right. They'll ask for your personal documents, your ID, and your proof of address. If you're buying or selling a property, they'll be asking for the sale of property documents. It seems onerous, but once you get it done, you've got that account open and it's worth it. And if it's a business transaction, they will be asking for your either your contrato social, or in English, it'll be your articles of association, your registration number at company's house or wherever. And if it's a loan, they'll be asking for the loan document, the agreement, and the statement, the bank statement of the donor or the person, the party which is lending. My advice is you're going to have to face these bureaucracy requirements anyway. So quit procrastinating. It is a headache, but it's worth it for the benefit you get, for the margin, the exchange rate benefit you get. Don't know if anyone's been here long enough to remember Rio Surreal, where everyone said Rio is getting really expensive. This is when it was in the boom, right? Around 2010, 11, 12, things were really expensive. Let's look at inflation expectations. Have a look at that graph, which I got from a website, a cool website called Trading Economics. Now, I believe these figures are, the official figures are underreported. Just look at your own experience of going to the supermarket, going to restaurants, transport costs. The actual inflation rate here, so in the top left, the figure in the top left, 7.17, that's the general 12-month inflation rate to September. So September 2021 to September 2022, 7.17% inflation in Brazil. And the projected rate is 5.91. So sorry, 5.99. So that's Q4 this year going back 12 months. And the projection is that it will decrease. And at the end of 2023, they're saying a 4% inflation rate for the year ending 2023. And if you look at food price inflation in isolation, then you're looking at 11.7 September to September just gone. And you're seeing a projected decline in that rate. They're saying, well, it looks like food's going to be below, the food inflation rate is going to be below the general inflation rate by the end of next year. The graph below, that's the 12-month rate ending the month, the lower axis and the x-axis. So you can see it's come down considerably from 12.13, which was the highest reported rate here. And so that's a historic graph. So what do we do? It's a reality. Maybe those projections are wrong. Maybe inflation will be more persistent. Net income. How do we protect our net income? Some of these are basic tips. I'd say everyone should have a personal budget and review it on a monthly and quarterly basis. Be ruthless. It's amazing. You know the expression, many small holes sink a big ship. So I remember doing this for a client, and we looked at several things like magazine subscriptions. I asked, do you actually read these magazines? Come on, be honest. No. Get it all out. You're saving like 200 or 300 reals a month. That all adds up, right? There were memberships, things like a gym membership. If you're using the gym and you like the gym, okay, I know this is slightly digressing from the theme of the presentation, but it does matter. If you get rid of those subscriptions, if you like running, go and run outside. You don't need to be a member of a gym. You know, there are these things when costs are going up and when you have volatility in the market, if you're projecting some kind of financial difficulty, if you're struggling to make ends meet, you've got to be ruthless with your finances. What can you reduce? What lifestyle habits can you change? I know it's easier for us in Rio because you can go out and you don't need to spend that much in Rio. You can just go for a jog around Lagoa, which is, maybe that's the reason why I chose this photo for this slide. I love that. It's one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. The lagoon here, going for a run around that. Why do you need to be a member of a gym? But if you're in Sao Paulo, you're going to be spending every time you leave your house. That's just the way it is. But can you generate another income stream? If you've got a full-time job, you may not have time to do that. If you've got, long hours, you're going home to family and kids. But if you've got the flexibility to develop a side gig, why not? And why not do it in another currency to have a bit of diversification? The next thing, I really can't believe I'm saying this because I never liked the concept of, you can parcelar in Brazil. So it's not, you can buy something today. So you can buy these glasses today, and then you can divide the cost without an increment for, let's say, 6 months. If you want to pay over 12 months, for example, you may be paying more. You may have juros or interest added on. But if you can manage it and if you can be organized, think about the larger expenses you have, like these glasses, like a flight, for example. Flight prices going up as well considerably, but if you can organize yourself such that you manage this and don't let it get out of control, then you can. If you've got that discipline, then I would recommend doing the parcelar strategy. But if you're disorganized with your finances, just forget everything I've said over the last minute. It's something I wouldn't have recommended when inflation was much lower and under control, but it's a strategy. Protecting capital. Right, a lot of people have money in conta corrente, right? Current account, whether it's in Brazil or overseas, this advice applies. So if you've got money, which your emergency fund, your near-term spending, keep that in a higher interest account if you can, which is liquid. And those are available in most banks. So you don't need to put it into stocks or complex funds. Put it in a pocket within the bank, which will give you a higher interest rate. Every little counts. If you aggregate all of these things, plus the comments I shared on the previous slide, it all adds up, right? If you've got money to invest, be diversified. There's no point being really conservative when you've got high inflation because lower risk investments tend to lag inflation. So you can, it's a good idea to be diversified and diversified across currencies as well. The next word here, desbancarização. That means, that's the word to describe the movement in Brazil away from the traditional banking providers to alternative providers, like fund platforms, for example, like FX, fintechs. They're all outside the traditional banking system and they're cheaper and they offer competitive products, a wider range of competitive products. So you may be able to, in many cases, so let's say you've got 100,000 reais in a bank CDB. You can move that to, let's say, a fund platform, which may give you a more competitively priced product. You've got to shop around or get yourself an independent financial advisor to help you. And the return, given that they've got a wider range, they can reduce the cost and increase the return. As I said, it all adds up. All of these increments add up. There are some inflation-linked investments in Brazil. Now, those are relatively conservative, and they'll be able to give you a margin above inflation if you are able to commit to locking that money up for, let's say, 2, 3, or 4 years. You've got to have a local regulated advisor to talk to you about that specifically and discuss the actual notes, the actual structured products they would offer. I can't do that. So it's worth exploring to protect your money against persistent inflation. And then overseas, a lot of people have pensions overseas, which they forget about when they come to Brazil, out of sight, out of mind. It's worth reviewing those with your, the pension scheme. If you've left one back in Ireland or the UK or wherever, it's worth looking at how you can adjust that because you're going to eventually be drawing on that in your retirement. And also look at your previdencia privada. So you've got to talk to a specialist here to maybe change the allocation and, fine-tune it in line with the current times we're living in. Thank you very much. I covered quite a lot. We've got a YouTube channel. There's a lot of interesting content there. So that's YouTube, and the handle is @IpanemaWealth. And then the website is IpanemaWealth.com. I've just put the news tab there. So IpanemaWealth.com/news. That'll take you directly to some articles. And they're quite practical because everything that I've prepared on the YouTube channel and the website, and my colleagues have prepared as well, it's based on the clients that we've dealt with and people in the community, people that some of you would probably know or know of. So it's very much tailored to the expat and foreign resident community based on our real experience. Thank you very much for following, and if you have any questions, here we are. And again, thanks to the IBN.
Thank you, Amit, and also Liam. I think we all learned a lot. So we're now going to go through a few questions that we have received. And just to let you know, guys, the ones that we can provide the answer tonight, you can also send us an email in contact@ibn.com. And I will just give a tip here. Don't forget to follow us on social media, our Instagram and LinkedIn, and connect with the guys as well. A lot of connections to be done tonight. So, and also to know a little bit more about following events. I have a few questions here. Why Brazil? And what are the areas to invest in? And where is the growth?
Who's that to?
For you.
All right, okay. Why Brazil? Well, the Brazilian economy, it's obviously been suffering over the last 2 years, but there are a lot of people who believe the stock market is relatively cheap. Yeah, it's volatile, but there are a lot of hidden gems in the stock market. You don't necessarily have to buy the index. You can if it's really long term, but there are a lot of small and mid caps if you've got the stomach for that. Small and mid caps are kind of volatile everywhere. We've seen that in the US for most of this year. So there are a lot of hidden gems, but I think the agro sector, fintech sector generally, they're really booming. So you may not be able to access those via the stock market, but through private investment and specialist funds you can. There are a lot of angel investing opportunities, but I believe the opportunity in Brazil in terms of investing is in the private space and in the small and mid space. And I'll also say, if you want to do something yourself, if you've got a great business idea, I've seen many people replicate a concept from the developed world, so to speak, and then bring that over to Brazil. Many of them have been successful, not all of them, but many of them have. So if you've got an idea, research it, and you've got a market. It's a small market of about 210 million people who love to spend, love to have fun. They refer, I love this country. It's my home, and I'm cheering for it. And there's so many reasons to be positive, even though sometimes it's hard to be with certain events and news flow. But there's potential here.
Glad to hear, sir.
Just to add to that, Brazil has a thriving blockchain sector, so technology is one area to invest in. That's an area for serious potential growth. Brazil's going to be hosting the Web Summit in Rio next year, and what blockchain and Web3 are areas to invest in, serious areas of potential growth as far as I'm concerned. And then there's always agriculture and petroleum, big areas in Brazil to invest in. So on to the next question.
Yeah.
I'm suspect to say, because I also love Brazil, but Ireland as well. So
Ireland's amazing as well. I love it.
Yeah, a bit cold, but I love it.
Nothing wrong with a bit of cold. It's a friendly place.
Oh, it's my favorite thing in Brazil, in Ireland. It's the weather. So for you now, Liam, about exit strategies.
Now this is a bit of a
liquidity.
Well, is there true liquidity is a bit of a complex element to it, but exit strategies are only as good as your entry strategies. So if you come into Brazil with all your money and you set up your company well and you have it all registered in a bank and everything's gone to plan, you should have no problems getting the money out. It's only as complicated coming in as it is coming out. But if, like me, you make big mistakes sometimes and you learn from the process, you don't learn from the process. If the money comes in a complicated manner, it'll be complicated to go out. So it is a bureaucratic process. So the liquidity lies in simplification of the entry strategy.
Perfect. Now, for you, Amit, currency. How do you get a meaningful return when the Brazilian exchange has been as high as 6 to 1 in the recent past?
So that would mean someone bringing money into the country from overseas, or so. Okay, if you're investing within Brazil, so if you're investing it within Brazil, it doesn't really matter, right? Because you're entering and exiting in reals. You're thinking about using the return within Brazil. So anyone, let's say, if you bought a property at peak around 2013, and the money's staying in Brazil, and you're going to use it for another property purchase, doesn't really matter. But if you're bringing money in overseas, if you think the real, so if you think the asset is going to appreciate, which I guess you would if you're making that decision. So let's say you want to buy a fund or a property, you bring it in from euros, then you think the currency will appreciate as well. Maybe that's a good opportunity. So as an example, if you think there's a business which is going to recover or a property which is going to appreciate, you're getting in at a good rate if you're bringing it in from hard currency. And then hopefully if the currency improves for the sake of Brazil and the asset improves, you might get double bubble. You might get a really good return if you take that money out and receive it in euros again. You need to be worried if it's like 3 to 1, as it was. A lot of people got their fingers burnt in the past in buying reals, which were stronger then. And then we went into a recession, the real weakened, the asset prices went down, they got hit 2 ways.
Good. And I remember when I got my first bunch of dollar, 1 to 1. Great time.
Wow, yeah.
As a Brazilian, it was a good time.
Yeah. I've got a question here.
Yes. So let me see here. Amit, how do you think the environment of the parents of the real plan, Arida and Bacha, will resonate with investors? How will Lula reconcile this apparent dichotomy?
How do you think the involvement of the...
Sorry.
I can speak to that one a little bit. The parents of the Real plan are one of the reasons I was actually for Lula's re-election, and the fact that they were the ones behind Lula and not Bolsonaro. They were fathers of the central bank, fathers of the Real. They oversaw the transition from the Cruzeiro and hyperinflation onto the Real, which is bought. While it's an unstable currency, it's just stable compared to the Cruzeiro. So I'd say I wouldn't call it a dichotomy per se. I'd say it's actually a big thing in favor of the Lugo government and will lead to a stronger real. I don't know what you think about that, Amit.
I'm not sure, honestly. I think if I were to comment, I would say it's got more to do with. If you're talking specifically about the effect on the real, I would say it's got more to do with interest rate pairing and public finances, but wouldn't be able to comment on this one.
Perfect. Now we have another one here from Liam. Someone once said that Brazil is the country of the future and always will be. What our speakers think about this? What our speakers think? Is it the case of nadar e morrer na praia, as we say in Brazil, get close and blow it?
It could well be, but as far as I can see, if Brazil goes ahead and streamlines its Banco Central policies, as appears to be the case, and continues on with its fantastic central bank sort of initiatives that it has, like PIX and the central bank digital currency that's going to be launched next year, Brazil is not going to die on the beach. It is going to swim and swim. But if they mess it up, they mess it up. But I can't see it happening. I see great promise for Brazil when it comes to the central bank. All they have to do is streamline their policies and open up the country a little more.
Yeah, I would add to that. If we have a good reforma, a really robust reforma tributária, so tax reform and all of the other reforms, the structural reforms, if they go through, I'm going to be very optimistic. But that depends on the relationship between President and Congress and all of the other parties involved. But I am really hoping that happens.
So next question here. Amit, what would you advise to foreign business when looking to partner with distributors on the ground here in Brazil? Thinking in particular about the beverage sector.
Okay, so if you're looking to partner here, that's obviously good for business. You've got to look at their track record, reputation, legal history, and if you already know, if you've got a short list of who you're dealing with, it would depend if you're an inward investor or how much experience you have with Brazil. But let's say someone who's trying this for the first time, you've actually got to come here and talk to. You've got to go to trade fairs, talk to people, and do a lot of due diligence on anyone you're thinking of partnering up. It's imperative to do that. I did that before, I approached my now business partners. But obviously, if it's a larger scale business, it's obviously a bigger scale what you have compared to a service company, which is what I have. But if you're looking at something as complex as that, you've got to have a lot of due diligence, and you've got to make sure you've got a very good accountant as well, not just someone who's preparing tax statements, but somebody who's business savvy and can help you with other areas of outsourcing, so you retain control. So it's got to be tax, compliance, and outsourcing as well. So an entrepreneurial accountant, and have a very solid process of legal advice. It may mean spending a bit of money in the beginning, but it'll help you immensely, because the fruit here, the gold at the end of the rainbow, it's the market, the size of the market here in Brazil. And the propensity to spend here, it's a big consumer market. There's another question. There's another comment I saw. CNPJ is an adventure. It depends. You've got to have the right advice. I've seen cases where it drags on, but you've got to get the right advice.
I've just opened one, and it takes about two to 3 weeks to open a CNPJ, and it's actually really easy to open a CNPJ, but opening a CNPJ well is a different question. Yeah. So you do want to get good legal and accounting advice before you even begin to think about opening one. Because if you get your contrato social wrong, it can be a mess to clean up. But it's actually quite easy. The problem is not so much opening the CNPJ, it's getting the money in to that CNPJ from overseas, as I said in my presentation.
So true. And also I welcome everyone here. If you guys have any questions about it or any other topic, please contact us in IBN. We can actually direct and make what we are here for, networking, okay? Just think about us. And there is another question here. What do you consider what do you consider per value, euro and real?
I don't know, when we say
I
par
think
value.
that question came while you were talking about something.
Okay, so it came during the presentation.
Yes.
The value is what the market says it is. It's 5 point. Let me see what it's. I think it closed at 5.48 today. Well, closed. I say closed. It was 5.48 before I switched my computer off. So at about 4:30 Brazil time. But that's what the market believes it's worth. I think, allow me to rephrase that. Feel free to comment, but do I think it's a good deal right now? If I had euros or a hard currency, do I think it's a good thing to draw money and bring it into Brazil now? I would say yes. Again, I don't want to be held to this, but I would say yes, because I would expect the real to strengthen slightly next year, not massively, but slightly. So just because I think the transition will eventually be smooth and we'll have some progress with reforms. But the thing which could reverse that would be a tightening of exchange rate, of interest rates in US and Euro and the Eurozone, while Brazil has to eventually reduce interest rates. So that might be the force which weakens the real. But I'm hoping there's more optimism and positivity in Brazil to bring confidence to the Brazilian economy. One may offset the other, and we may still be in this, 5 to 5.5 range. But I'd say, yeah, if you've got a great investment idea in Brazil, bring it in, bring the money in, and make it work.
You have to do your homework, and there is a room for shortcuts. Thank you, Leon.
Oh yeah.
So there was another quick question here. What would you recommend as best money transfer service? Because I saw you both comment on that.
I've used
Liam, do you
MoneyCore
want
in the past. I've used MoneyCore in the past, and while the bureaucracy is quite absurd, it's 20 documents you might need to bring money in. Once the bureaucracy's been taken care of, you can rest assured the central bank is happy, and the money comes from an account to an account, and it goes straight from a Brazilian. You get a better rate, and it goes straight from a Brazilian account to your Brazilian account. And the benefit here is that there's actually no limits. There can be limits on your Perso physical account and your Perso juridic account imposed by the likes of Itaú and Santander. And because MoneyCore transfer to their own account and have a holding account, there's no annual limit in place. So if it's a big transfer, as Amit had said, MoneyCore are probably the best service to use.
if anyone wants to consider that, that's useful when you're buying a property or bringing in, I'd say anything more than 20 or 30,000 euros. We can help with the compliance and paperwork. It's very simple. So we can help with that. And there are always certain issues like, you may have to, as I said in the slide, you may have to submit or update your tax return. So we'll be able to advise you. And so yeah, feel free to get in touch via the contact details.
Perfect. So now one for Leon.
Yeah.
What Irish Business Network?
What can we
What
do?
can we do exactly?
Well, we're a network of business professionals, and what we have is experience and friends like Amit here, who can help us negotiate the pitfalls, negotiate the difficulties that are involved in opening in a business in Brazil, and we can speak from personal experience. And what we can't handle for small to medium enterprises, which is basically what we can handle because we have experience in that regard, we can put on to the likes of Melissa Fettis over in Enterprise Ireland, or we have context for what we can't handle. We have context for the people who we can handle. So the Irish Business Network can essentially help any small to medium enterprise bring money into Brazil, set up the company, give good legal and accounting advice, put people in the right put people in touch with the right contacts, and basically help a small to medium enterprise set up themselves. And if there's anything we can't handle, we have the contacts to pass them on.
Yeah.
Perfect. So, any more questions? I don't see any more questions coming. I would just put one question from myself then.
Sure.
In relation to the barriers of language, because actually in Brazil, it's a great market, great
Yeah.
test market, large population,
Yeah.
but in relation to language, it's only 6%, I guess, of the population that they are fluent in English. What you guys, as entrepreneur and investors, and as a person who lives in Brazil, what do you guys think about it?
Well, it can be very difficult if you don't speak perfect Portuguese, and it can be very
Yeah.
difficult for a lot of people. I found at Blockchain Rio when I was there, a lot of people don't speak very good English. So there's definitely a competitive advantage if you speak perfect, if you're perfectly bilingual. And there's not a lot of people in Rio de Janeiro are. There's actually not an awful lot of foreigners here. So the language barrier is a thing, but there's nothing that can't be studied, nothing that can't be overcome. Really.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. It's an advantage to know Portuguese, and it's a great language to learn. I'm not very good at languages, but I think I've made it. I think I'm almost fluent. The grammar is really difficult, but I think just learn through music, learn through bossa nova and other music, and just talk to people. It's a very friendly country, and I think people appreciate it if you make the effort. And the kind of embarrassing mistakes I've made in Portuguese, it's a good laugh, and they correct you, and no one looks down on you. It's not that kind of culture. They encourage you, and they help. So it's worth learning for pleasure, and obviously you have an advantage being here if you speak the language.
So I think in terms of questions, that's all we have for tonight. And I will thank you guys for this amazing afternoon and last evening. So thank you very, very much. And I hope you all enjoyed as I did, plus a lot of learning. And I hope you guys can connect with IBN as well. And if you guys want to say some words, please feel free.
Thank you, Rubia, for doing an excellent job as moderator, and thanks, Amit, for joining us. And any questions, feel free to shoot us an email, and we'll be happy to answer them.
Yeah, thank you to the IBN, thank you to Rubia, thank you to Liam, and everyone for joining. And I know this webinar is coming to an end, but you've got our contact details, and it'll be a pleasure to help. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you all. So please be in touch. Our details are there. And I hope you guys enjoyed, and I hope to see you all on our next event. Thank you, Amit. Thank you, Liam. Have a good
Bye-bye.
evening.
Cheers.
Thank you.